Wanted, caretaker for farm. Simply watch over a 688-acre patch of hilly farmland and feed a few cows. You get 300 a week and a nice two-bedroom trailer. Someone older and single preferred, but we'll consider all. Relocated, a must. You must have a clean record and be trustworthy. This is a permanent position. The farm is used mainly as a hunting preserve. It's overrun with game, has a stocked 3-acre pond, but some beef cattle will be kept. The nearest neighbor is a mile away. The place is secluded and beautiful. It will be really a good getaway for the right person. Job of a lifetime. If you are ready to relocate, please contact ASAP. Position will not stay open. Scott Davis had answered the job ad on Craigslist on October 9, 2011, and now, 4 weeks later to the day, he was watching the future it had promised glide past the car window. Acre after acre of Ohio farmland, dotted with cattle and horses, each patch framed by rolling hills and anchored by a house and a barn, sometimes old and worn, but never decrepit. Nothing a little carpentry wouldn't fix. Davis rode in the back seat of a white Buick Sabra. In the front sat his new employer, a man he only knew as Jack, and a boy Jack had introduced as his nephew, Brogan. The kid who was driving the car was only in high school, but was already a giant, at least as tall as his uncle, who was plenty tall. Jack was a stocky, middle-aged man. Davis noticed that he missed a couple of spots shaving and had a tattoo on his left arm. He was chatty, telling Davis about his ex-wife, his favorite breakfast food, and his church. Davis, 48, had left his girlfriend behind in South Carolina, given away the accounts for his landscaping business, and put most of his equipment in storage. He packed his other belongings, clothes, tools, stereo, equipment, his Harley Davidson, into a trailer, hitched it to his truck, and driven to southeastern Ohio. He told everyone that he was moving in part to help take care of his mom, who lived outside Akron and whose house has fallen apart. Moving back home at his age might seem like moving backwards in life, but caretaker job he'd stumbled across online made it seem like he'd be getting paid to live free and easy for a while. A no-rent trailer plus 300 a week in exchange for just watching over a farm with a few head of cattle outside the town of Cambridge. Jack had reminded him in an email to bring his Harley because there were plenty of beautiful rural roads to put in. Jack and Brogan had met Davis for breakfast at Shoney's in Marietta, where Jack had quizzed his new hire about what he'd brought with him in the trailer. Davis boasted that it was full from top to bottom. After breakfast, Davis followed Jack and Brogan to the food center aquarium in small town of Cadwell. He left his truck and trailer in the parking lot to be picked up later. Jack told Davis that the small road leading to the farm had split, and they'd have to repair it before bringing the truck up. They'd been driving for about 15 minutes, the paved road giving way to gravel, and then the gravel to dirt, while Davis watched the single straight bars on his cell phone disappear. On a densely wooded, hilly sketch, Jack told his nephew to pull over. "Drop us off where we get that deer at last time," he said, explaining to Davis that he'd left some equipment down the hill by the creek and they need to retrieve it to repair the road. Davis got out to help, stuffing a cigarette and a can of Pepsi into the pocket of his jean jacket. He followed Jack down the hill, but when they reached a patch of wet grass by the creek, Jack seemed to have lost his way and suggested they headed back up to the road. Davis turned around and started walking, with Jack following behind him. Davis heard a click and the word "fuck" spinning around. He saw Jack pointing a gun at his head. "Where we got that deer at last time?" In a flash, it was clear to Davis he was the next deer. Davis instinctively threw up his arms and shielded his face. The pistol didn't jam the second time. As Davis heard the crack of the gunshot, he felt his right elbow shatter. He turned and started to run, stumbling and falling over the uneven ground. The shots kept coming as Davis ran deeper into the woods, but none of them hit home. He ran and ran until he heard no more shots or footsteps behind him. He came to the road and crossed it, worried that if he stayed in the open, he'd be spotted by his killer. He was losing a lot of blood by now, but he hid in the woods for several hours until the sun was low, before he made his way back to the road and started walking. Jeff Shalocking was sitting in his mother's living room watching Jeopardy when he heard the doorbell. That alone was strange, and he'd later explain on the witness stand. Because out there in the boondocks, visitors generally walk in the front door. Besides, he hadn't heard a car drive up. Shockley sent his 9-year-old nephew to see who it was. He's terrified. The kid came back yelling, "There's a guy at the door. He's been shot and he's bleeding right now." Shockley assumed his nephew was playing a prank. But when he went to the door, there was a stranger, holding his right arm across his body, his sleeve and pant legs soaked with blood. The guy was pale and fidgety and wouldn't sit down at the picnic table outside. He asked, "Could you call 911?" Sheriff Stephen Hannibal of Noble County arrived about 15 minutes. He would later describe Davis as remarkably coherent for a man who had just been shot and was bleeding heavily. But what Davis was saying made no sense. He claimed that he'd come to the area for a job watching over a 688-acre cattle ranch. And that the man who offered him the job had shot him. But Hannibal didn't know any 688-acre cattle ranches in Noble County. Nothing even close. Mostly of the large tracts of land had been brought up for mining companies. Davis kept going on about a Harley Davidson and how the guy who shot him was probably going to steal it. The sheriff sized Davis up, middle-aged white guy, puffy eyes, long hair, jean jacket, babbling about a Harley, and figured he was involved in some kind of dope deal gone bad. Hannum made a few calls to his local informants, but none of them had heard anything. Then they located the truck and trailer in the food center aquarium parking lot. And that there was just a Davis. There was the Davis had described and it was beginning to look. Hannibal later recalled, like Mr. Davis truly was a victim rather than whatever I thought he was at the beginning. Davis wasn't the only person to answer that Craigslist ad. More than 100 people applied for the caretaker job, a fact that Jack was careful to cite in his emails back to applications. He wanted to make sure that they knew the position was highly sought after. Jack had a specific type of candidate in mind, a middle-aged man who had never been married or recently divorced, who had no strong family connections, someone who had a life he could easily walk away from. If picked, I will need you to start quickly, he would write in his emails. Jack painstakingly designed the ad to conjure a very particular male fantasy, the cowboy or rancher out in the open country, herding cattle, mending fences, hunting game, living a dream that could transform a post-recession drifter into a timeless American icon. From the many discarded drafts of the ad and that the investigators later found, it was clear that Jack was searching for just the right pitch to catch a certain kind of man's eye. He tinkered with details, the number of acres on the property, the idea of early bonus and paid utilities, before settling on his final language. Hilly, secluded, job of a lifetime. If a woman applied for the job, Jack wouldn't bother responding. If a man applied, he would ask for critical information right off the bat. How old are you? Do you have a criminal record? Are you married? Jack seemed drawn to applicants who were less formal in their emails replies, those who portrayed excitement with it, vulnerability. I was raised on a farm as a boy, and have raised some of my own cattle and horses as well, wrote one. I'm still in good shape and not afraid of hard work. I really hope you give me a chance. If for some reason I wouldn't work out for you, no hard feelings and all. I would stick with you until you found your help. Thank you very much, George. If a candidate lived near Akron, Jack might interview him in person at a local Waffle House or at a mall food court. He'd start by handing the man a pre-employment questionnaire, which stated that he was an equal opportunity employer. Jack and the applicant would make small talk about XYs or tattoos, and Jack, who fancied himself a bit of a street preacher, would describe the ministry he'd founded. He'd ask about qualifications, any carpentry experience, ever worked with livestock, and provide more detail about the farm. Jack explained that his uncle owned the place. He had 6 brothers and sisters with a lot of kids and grandkids running around. especially on holiday weekends and during hunting season. The picture Jack painted was a boisterous, extended family living an idyllic rural life. Pretty much the opposite of lonely bachelor lives of men he was interviewing. Shockling went to the door, and there was a stranger, holding his right arm across his body, his sleeve and pants legs soaked with blood. If the interview went well, Jack might tell the applicant that he was finalist for the job, but if the applicant gave any signs that he did not meet one of Jack's criteria, the meeting would end abruptly. For one candidate, everything seemed on track until he mentioned that he was about to get married. Jack immediately stood up, thanked him for his time. George, the man who'd written the email about being raised on a farm, told Jack that he'd once been a security guard and was an expert in martial arts. He figured he would be a plus given that he had to guard all that property when no one else was around. But the mood of the interview immediately changed for the worse. Jack took the applicant out of the George hands before he even finished filling it out. Said he'd call him in a couple of days. If George didn't hear anything, he should assume that someone else got it. Oh, wow. Scott Davis had really long hair, you know. He looked pretty up there. And David Polly, he also had long hair too. Weird. David Polly was the first applicant who met Jack's exacting criteria. He was 51 years old. See, close. Divorced and living with his older brother, Richard, in his spare bedroom in Norfolk, Virginia. Nearly 2 decades, Polly had worked at Randolph Budley, a wholesale distributor of building materials, managing the warehouse and driving a truck. He married his high school sweetheart, Susan, and adopted her son, Wade, from an early marriage. For most of his life, Polly was a man of routine. His relatives said he ate his cereal, took a shower, and went to work at precisely the same times every day. He was a stable influence in my life, said Wade. I grew up thinking everyone had to be 9 to 5. That week, Polly went to the men's Bible study group he's been attending since he moved into Richard's house. For weeks he's been praying, never to win the lottery, nor to get a girlfriend, always for steady work. Everyone there agreed that God had finally heard his prayers. The church gave Polly $300 from its Helping Hands fund so that he could rent a U-Haul trailer. He packed up all his stuff, his model trains, his books, DVDs, his Jeff Gordon t-shirts and posters, his Christmas lights, and a small box containing the ashes of his old cat, Maxwell Edison. And he hit the road. Polly arrived at the Red Roof Inn in Parkinsburg, West Virginia, on the night of Saturday, October 22nd, 2011. It was not far from Montreal, Ohio, where he's supposed to meet his new employer at the Bob Evans for breakfast the next morning. He called a sister who told him that she loved him and said to call back the next day. Then, just before going to bed, he called up Ma, who told him, "Good luck. As soon as you're done talking to them tomorrow, let me know. Give me an exact location so I can come down Saturday and we can hang out." The next day came and went with no call from Polly. Ma tried on the walkie-talkie, but there was no response. He then called Richard and got the number for Polly's new employer, Jack, whom he reached on the cell phone. "Yes, everything was all right," Jack told Ma. He just left for Polly with his list of chores. Yes, he would pass on the message when he saw him the next day. But a few more days went by without a call, so Ma dialed Jack again. The next time, Jack said that when he showed up at the farm that day, Polly had packed all his things in the truck and said he was leaving. Apparently, he met some guy in town who was heading to Pennsylvania to work on a drilling rig, and he decided to follow him there. There was no way Ma thought to himself that Polly would take off for Pennsylvania without telling him. The two men had been best friends since high school, when they bonded over their mutual distaste for sports and love of cars. Over the years, they moved to different cities, got married, got divorced, and they stayed constantly in touch, Ma said. They kept their walkie-talkies on their bedside tables and called each other before even got up to brush their teeth in the morning. They talked by Ma's estate about 50 times a day. Most people couldn't figure out how we had so much to talk about, Ma said. But there's always ended up being something. But after Polly reached Ohio, nothing. Early in November, about 2 weeks after he last spoken to Polly, Ma called his friend to his sister. "Debbie, haven't heard from him either." He was also worried. A habit she on over her lifetime. When she and her brother were 14. Her mother got emphysema. Since their father had left the family and the older two siblings were already out of the house, Deb quit school and, as she put it, basically became David's mother. Years later, she moved to Maine with her second husband, and Polly stayed in Northfolk, but the twin bond remained strong. By the time she received the concerned phone call from Ma, Deb had already spent several days sitting with a laptop at the kitchen table in her PJs, looking for clues to explain why she hadn't heard a word from her brother. With a red pen and a sheet of legal paper, she made a list of places to call. The motel in Parkersburg, the U-Haul rental place, but she heard nothing and learned nothing from any of them. It wasn't until Friday night, November 11th, nearly 3 weeks after Polly had left for Ohio, that she remembered something else. Cambridge, the town where he had said the farm was located. She typed the name into Google and found the local paper, the Daily Jeffersonian. She scrolled through the page until she landed on the headline dated November 8th. Man says he was lured here for work, then shot. There was no mention of the man's name, but there was one detail that sounded familiar. He said he'd been hired to work on a 688-acre ranch. The article cited the Noble County Sheriff, Stephen Hannum. Deb called his office right away. After picking up Scott Davis 5 days earlier, Hannum and his team had been following up on his strange story, but not all that urgently. They had David's explanation about the Craigslist ad, and they located security camera footage from his breakfast meeting with employees. But Deb's phone call lit a fire under Hannum's investigation. She told Jason Mackey, a detective in the sheriff's office, that Polly had talked with his friend Ma 50 times a day and then suddenly stopped. Although no one said it explicitly at the time, a sudden drop-off like that meant a missing person, and then in turn meant that there might be a body. Next day, Saturday, the sheriff's office called an FBI cybercrime specialist to help them get information about who had written the Craigslist ad. They also sent a crew with cadaver dogs back to the woods where Davis had been shot. One FBI agent would later recall the torrential downpour that day and sounds of coyotes howling. A few hours before dark, the investigators found a patch of disturbed soil overlaid with 3 branches. They began digging with their hands until they found blood seeping up from the wet earth, and a socked foot appeared. The body, then, they discovered, was face down. And one of the items they removed from it was a corded black leather bracelet with a silver clasp. Mackie telephoned Deb and described the bracelet. Yes, it was her brother, she told them. The investigators also found a second grave. This one was empty. They later learned it was meant for Davis. Now the investigators knew they were looking for a murderer. By early next week, they have identified the man in the breakfast meeting footage as a local named Richard Beasley. Additionally, the cybercrime specialist had received enough information from Craigslist to trace the IP address of the ad's originating computer to a small house in Akron. When the investigators arrived at the house, its occupant, Joe Bias, said he had never written any ads on Craigslist and he didn't know anyone named Richard Beasley or Jack. But when they showed him a picture, he recognized the man who called himself Jack. It was someone new as Ralph Geiger, who until recently had rented a room for Bias for $100 a week. Real nice guy, Bias would later recall on the witness stand. He didn't cuss, didn't smoke, didn't drink. First Sunday he was there, went to church. As it happened, Geiger had just left him a note with his new cell phone number. The landlord called Geiger and kept him on the line as investigators traced the call. On November 16th, an FBI SWAT team arrested the man outside another Akron house where he had been renting a room after leaving Bias's place. The suspect's name was in fact Richard Beasley. Although investigators didn't know it yet, Ralph Geiger was the name of his first victim. Tracking down the teenager who had been with Beasley, Jack, when he drove Scott Davis out into the woods, proved easier. Just as Jackie said, his name is Brogan Rafferty, to be exact, and he was a junior at Stowe Munroe Falls High School. A detective and an FBI agent drove to the school and interviewed Rafferty in the principal's office, while another set of investigators searched his house. Rafferty later told his mother that before he left school that day, he had found a girl that he liked and he kissed her, even though her boyfriend was nearby. He had been worried that he'd never see her or anyone else from high school again. He was right to worry. That evening, police arrived with a warrant and he was taken into custody. Polly grew increasingly frustrated with the position at Randolph Bundy. And finally, around 2003, he quit. He bounced around other two jobs but could never find anything steady. He and Wade often had disagreements, and in 2009, he and Susan got a divorce. Now he found himself sitting on his brother's easy chair, using Richard's laptop to look for jobs. Mostly he'd find temporary stuff, jobs that would only last like a few weeks. Sometimes he had to borrow money just to buy toothpaste. He got along fine with Richard and his wife, Judy. But their second bedroom, with its seafoam green walls, frilly lampshades, and ornate dresser, was hardly a place he would put up his poster of Heidi Klum in a bikini or start enjoying the post-divorce freedom. Polly was cruising online job opportunities when he came across a Craigslist ad list in October 2011. Usually Polly looked for jobs only around Norfolk, but his friend since high school, Chris Mullen, had moved to Ohio a couple of years earlier and was doing well. He and Maul talked dozens of times on the Nextel walkie-talkies they bought specifically for that purpose. If Maul, who was also divorced, could pick up and start a new life, why couldn't Polly? And the Craigslist job sounded perfect. $300 a week and a rent-free place to live solved all Polly's problems at once. On top of that, his brother, an ex-Navy man, was always pestering Polly to cut his long hair before job interviews. With a gig like this, who would care whether he had long hair or the cattle? Polly sat down and wrote an email to Jack. Well, about me, I'm a 51 years young single male. I love the outdoors. I currently live in Virginia, have visited Ohio, and I really love the state. Being out there by myself will not bother me, as I like to be alone. I own my own pickup truck, so hauling would not be a problem. I could fix mostly anything. I have my own carpentry tools. If chosen, I will work hard to take care of your place and treat it like my own. I also have a friend in Rocky River, Ohio. Thank you, David. A few days later, Polly got an email back from Jack saying that he had narrowed his list down to 3 candidates, and you were one of the 3. Jack asked his usual questions. Was Polly married? Had he ever been arrested for a felony? And told him that if he was chosen, he'd have to start immediately. Richard remembers his younger brother being energized in a way he hadn't seen in months. Polly called Jack several times to see whether there was anything he could do to help him decide. Jack promised that he'd call by 2 p.m. on Friday, and Polly waited by the phone. When 2 o'clock came around and went, he told his brother, well, I guess the other person got chosen above me. But earlier that evening, the phone rang. When Polly got on the line, Richard recalls. His whole face lit up. I got it! I got the job! He yelled as soon as he hung up. He immediately called his friend Mal on the walkie-talkie and started talking a mile a minute. He swore that this was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he couldn't wait to pack up and go. To Polly's surprise, he's found himself in tears. For the past 2 years, he's been worrying about Polly, whom he'd always call his brother, with a different last name. Maul remembers it was like maybe this was a turning point. Oh, excuse me. My voice just cracked. It was like maybe this is the turning point and things are finally going to go right. They made a promise to each other that on Polly's first weekend in Ohio, after settling in, Maul would bring down his hot rod and they'd drive around on empty country roads. Next, Polly called his twin sister Deb, who lives in Maine. She told him that she hated the thought of him sitting alone on some farm for Christmas and made him promise that he'd come for the weekends and holidays. He told her that his new boss was a preacher and said he felt like the Lord was finally pointing him towards the right place where he might find peace. Richard Beasley, aka Jack, was born in 1959 and raised in Akron, primarily by his mother, who worked as a secretary at the local high school, along with his stepfather, too. He was briefly married and had a daughter, Tanya, who was about Rafiat's age. Over the years, he's worked as a machinist, but his job record was interrupted by spells in and out of jail. He served from 1985 to 1990 in a Texas prison on burglary charges and started in 1996 another 7 years in federal prison for firearms offense. When he went to trial for 2011 Craigslist murders, the photo favored by newspaper made him look deranged. with wild eyebrows and hair and crumpled mouth. But during the trial, with his white hair combed and his beard trimmed, he looked almost like Santa Claus, especially when he smiled. In the mid-2000s, a dump truck hit Beasley's car and he suffered head, chest, and spinal injuries. He had recently returned to Akron for federal prison, where he told everyone he found God and began spending a lot of time at a local megachurch called the Chapel. After an accident, he started taking opiates for back and neck pain and stopped working steadily. But Brogan, Rafiet's father Michael, who knew Beasley from the local motorcycle circuit, told me that even before the car wreck, Beasley had been lazy. He was known as someone who had a little of a angle going, like a scam artist. Michael Rafiet said people in their motorcycle club knew Beasley had a criminal record, but to Michael's Rafiet's, he seemed harmless, like he was all talk, no play. Michael Rafiet said he never once seen Beasley lose his temper in 20 years he knew him. Beasley didn't drink, smoke much, and he spent a lot of free time at the chapel, where he went to Bible study and worked in the soup kitchen. So when at age 8, Brogan Rafiet said he wanted to start going to church on Sundays, his dad said it was okay for him to go with Beasley. It was only church after all. And Rafiet, a single parent who was working long shifts at the time, hated waking up early on Sundays anyways. For the next 8 years, Beasley in regular presence in Rafiet's house on Sundays, coming by early to get his young charge, who'd be waiting in a slightly rumpled shirt. Sometimes when he took Rafiet to church, Beasley would bring along his daughter, Tanya, or Rafiet's half-sister, Rania, who was 3 years younger than Rafiet and shared the same mother, but like Rafiet, lived full-time with the other father. Rafiet's mother, Yvette, was a crack addict who didn't have custody of her 4 children and was rarely around when they were young. Beasley was a mentor to Rania and her brother. Rania's recalls, after Bible study, he'd sneak them leftover donuts and take them to McDonald's and talk to them about importance of school and dangers of drugs. The Bible is the key peace of mind and a road map to salvation, he wrote in the Bible he gave Brogan. Around 2009, Beasley found that he told his friends at a halfway house to help reform addicts, runaways, and prostitutes. Beasley would cruise the streets of Akron at night, picking up strays and bringing them to the house. If they were in trouble in the law, he would vouch for them in court, saying they had turned their lives into Christ. A few times, Rafiet asked Beasley whether they could go out and look for his mother, Yvette, who Rafiet always worried was in trouble. But there was another side to Beasley, into his halfway house. Amy Sowler, who later described herself as a witness on the witness stand at Rafiet's trial as a former crack addict and a prostitute, lived at the house on and off for more than 2 years, from 2009 to 2011. Beasley had picked her up one night and she came home to stay with him because he told her his mission was to save all the girls that are on the streets. She testified, I pictured him as a savior, somebody that was trying to help me. There were 4 to 5 other prostitutes in the house, Sailor recalled. Beasley got them all cell phones. Soon, instead of being their savior, he became their pimp. He began advertising their services online and driving them to meet Johns. Soller said that Beasley would do anything in his power to keep the girls at the house, including buying them drugs. Soller says she never saw Beasley get violent, although she added that she was nonetheless afraid of him. February 2011. Beasley was arrested in Ohio on a variety of drug charges. While he was in jail, investigators were building a prostitute case against him. He was released on bond by mid-July, but after he failed to check in with authorities in Texas, where he was still on parole for his earlier crimes, the state issued a warrant for his arrest, and he was deemed on the run from the law. Beasley wanted to disappear. The key, he realized, would be to assume a new identity, and it wasn't long before he came up with the idea. Whereas once he was preyed on prostitutes, now he would be targeted a member of a new class of vulnerable citizens drifting at the margins of society, unemployed, middle-aged white men. This will be the 4th time we've talked to you, and each time we get a little bit more. But tonight, all need to come out 100%. All right? 1 week after arresting Brogan Rafiet, investigators made a deal with their 16-year-old suspect. If he agreed to testify against Beasley, he would be charged only with compliance to murder and attempted murder, respectively. In the case of David Pauley and Scott Davis, he would not be charged with 2 other homicides that had by now been uncovered. Later, Rafiet would back out of the deal, but the plea deal interview was recorded and the judges allowed it to be played at Rafiet's trial. The story Rafiet told began in the first week of August when Beasley told Rafiet that he would run from the law. He was determined not to go back to jail, and he suggested to Rafiet that he needs his help to survive. The first thing Beasley wanted was a new identity, and he began hanging around a local homeless shelter searching for someone who looked like him. He had by now come up with the perfect lure for a male victim in post-recession America. He would present himself as a benefit but exacting employer, one with the power to alter a man's fortunes by granting him the job of a lifetime as the caretaker of a sprawling farm. It wasn't long before Beasley met a man named Ralph Geiger, who for many years had run a thriving maintenance business, but for whom jobs had gradually dried up. Geiger, 56, was staying at a shelter and looking for work, and Beasley told him that the caretaker's job he had invented. Geiger had lived on a farm when he was younger, and he leapt for the opportunity. Rafferty remembered Beasley quizzing Geiger about his size and appearance. "How much do you weigh? You look a lot like me, except your hair's a little bit darker." At what other moment in history could a serial killer identify a mid-aged white man as his most vulnerable targets? Whether Lafayette knew that Beasley intended to kill Geiger will later become a key point in the teenager's trial, and he told different versions of his story at different times. In his plea deal confession, Lafayette told the investigator that Beasley said that he needed a new identity and that this guy looked similar to him. He said that he needed to somehow murder him. Later, though, Lafayette would tell the jury he had no idea what was coming. The first time he realized that Beasley was anything other than a very nice man, he claimed, was on August 9th, when they drove Gregor to some wooded spot where they later would take David, Polly, and Scott Davis. After they got out of the car, Beasley raised a pistol and shot Gregor in the back of the head. It was as if somebody, and somehow I immediately slipped into a dream or something, Lafayette told the jury. "It's like I had ice in my veins." From then on, Lafayette said, he lived in a state of fear and panic, terrified that Beasley would kill his mother or half-sister Raina if he told anyone what happened, or maybe on their next run Beasley would kill him. "He was just scared, and he didn't see a way out," Lafayette's father told Michael. Michael told me, "Heroes aren't born at 16. Lafayette didn't tell anyone about Gregor's murder, but he did describe it in a poem dated August 16, 2011, that was later found on his hard drive. It was titled "Midnight Shift." "We took him out to the woods on a humid summer night. I walked in front of them. They were going back to the car. I didn't turn around. The loud crack echoed, and I didn't hear the thud. The two of us went back to the car for the shovels. He was still there when we returned. He threw the clothes in the garbage bag along with the personal items. I dug the hole. It reached my waist when I was in it, maybe 4 feet wide. We put him in defectively. They call them stiffs for a reason. We showered him with lime like a satanic baptism. It was like we were excommunicating him from the world. I thought there would be extra dirt. He wasn't a small man. There wasn't. I don't know how. We drove out of there discarding evidence as we went. Felt terrible until I threw up in the gas station bathroom where I was supposed to throw away all the bullets and shells. I emptied myself of the guilt with my dinner, but not for long. When I got home, took a shower, hotter than hell itself. Prayed like hell that night. Rafferty grew moody that fall, according to his parents and friends, but they figured it was just hormones or girl trouble. He later told his mom after the homecoming, while the other kids were having fun, all he could think about was crushing the Buick his dad had bought him, so that he could join Grandma Rita. He believed grandmother who died a few years earlier, but didn't wreck the car. He just stayed in his room and waited for Beasley to call. Beasley, meanwhile, was constructing a life with Ralph Geiger. He dyed his hair brown and found a room to rent. He went to the doctor to get prescription painkillers for injuries he sustained to his car accident. In September, he landed a job as a quality inspector at a company that made life gates for trucks. lift gates for trucks. Excuse me. But it didn't last long. Beasley's back still hurt, and he became worried that parole officer would somehow catch on to him. Still, he couldn't survive without a steady income. Perhaps that's when the idea came to him. The Geiger killing had gone so smoothly that he could turn it into a career of sorts, preying on other men who'd fallen out of the economy. Instead of trolling the shelters, as he'd done to find Gregor, Beasley came up with the strategy of placing an ad on Craigslist. After all, he didn't want his victims completely down and out. He needed men on the margins, yes, but not so marginal that he didn't have that didn't have any possessions at all. Worth killing for, you know? For a truck or a TV or a computer or even a motorcycle. On Sunday, October 23rd, as David Polly was driving his U-Haul full of stuff at the breakfast meeting with his new employer, Lafayette woke up early. He fed his cat, tidied his room, told his father he was heading out for a job digging drain ditches. "I love you, Dad," he said as he left to pick up Beasley, before driving to Bob Evans and Marietta. Beasley and Lafayette went to Kmart and bought a couple of shovels. Then they drove to a spot not far from where Gregor was buried, and Lafayette dug the grave intended for Polly. Before they left, Beasley put a $20 bill under a nearby rock. If it was gone when they came back, he'd know someone had been there. Yeah, because people just turn over rocks with $20 bills. That's how you find money. Just turn over rocks till it's fine. Okay. After breakfast with Polly, Beasley had his new hire follow him to the Imperium in Caldwell to put his truck and trailer. He told Polly the same story about the road to the farm being split when he would later tell Davis. On the Sunquinnet Drive in the Buick, Polly asked about the job, and Beasley told him not to worry. "You'll get honest day pay for an honest day work." When they pulled over near the creek, Beasley asked Lafayette and Polly to follow him up the hill. But Lafayette said he had to go to the bathroom, and then, as I finished and I turned around, Lafayette told the investigators, "I heard a crack." Polly was laying face down, and somehow his cowboy hat had ended up hanging on a nearby branch. Back in Akron, Beasley began to improvise. He heard from a friend about a reality TV show called Storage Wars, in which people bid on abandoning storage units, hoping there would be valuable items hidden inside. Beasley told people he was involved in that kind of thing and began to unload Polly's stuff. He returned the U-Haul, sold Polly's truck for $1,000, and sold the other belongings. Christmas lights, the model trains, some tackle boxes, the Jeff Gordon memorabilia to neighbors or a flea market. The Polly money quickly dwindled. But Beasley wasn't all that concerned. He already had a still bitter victim lined up, Scott Davis. Before Davis had even hit the road for Ohio, Beasley told his landlord that he had won a fantastic storage unit that contained a flat-screen TV, a computer, some law care equipment, and best of all, a Harley. He told Lafayette that he thought that he could get net worth $30,000 on this kill, enough for him to make it through the winter. But Beasley, moment of anticipated triumph, his gun jammed. Lafayette was waiting in the car when he saw Beasley hustling back towards him. "He got away," Beasley said, breathing hard as he climbed back into the Buick. If they saw Davis along the road, Lafayette told the investigators, "I was wanting to hit him with my car." But then they didn't find him, so they headed back onto the highway. Beasley started madly tossing things out of the car, the shovels, the leather jackets, the air freshener, even his laptop. If Davis made it to police, he didn't want the Buick to be easy identified. Lafayette went along, but he refused to toss out the rosary beads hanging from the rearview mirror. They were a gift from his Graham Rita. Eventually, they made their way back to Akron, where, at Lafayette saw it, any logic or purpose to Beasley's actions went out the window too. Later. Following a botched murder like Davis, you'd think Beasley would lie low. Hmm, he wasn't that smart then, apparently. But he'd been counting on that haul, and now that it had fallen through, he recklessly pursued another. Their police were already talking with Davis and beginning to track down leads. They didn't move quickly enough to save Beasley's fourth and final victim. On Sunday, November 13th, exactly a week after the attempt on Davis's life, Beasley and Lafayette picked up a man named Timothy Kern in the parking lot outside a pizzeria in Canton, where he spent the night sleeping in his car. Kern was from Akron area, 47-year-old and divorced. He recently lost his job as a street cleaner. Beasley had mental inventory of the items he thought Kern was bringing with him, and almost as soon as they got into Lafayette's Buick, Beasley began questioning him. Did he have the laptop he mentioned? He said no. He left it behind with his son Zachary and Nicholas. The flat screen TV? Same story. Zach and Nick had it instead. Instead, Kern had brought an old TV. Apart from that, he just had a couple of garbage bags full of clothes and cassette tapes, which fit easily in the back of Lafayette's car. That, and a late 80s sedan that he abandoned in the pizzeria parking lot because it barely ran. I get half a pit in my stomach, Lafayette told the investigators, because as the story goes on and on, I'm realizing that I'm about to help Beasley do this for no reason at all. Not that I even wanted to do it at all, but it takes, like all the memorial sanity and reason of doing this. It would be like if a lion killed a zebra just to kill it, just because it wanted to. Like it's hoofs or something. The man literally, I think, had $5 in his pocket. One other thing struck Lafayette at the time, enough so that he mentioned it to the investigators once more. Timothy Kern had given everything he had of value to his sons, who were just a little older than Lafayette himself. It was clear that Kern's family had broken up, but as just clear was that he loved his kids, Lafayette told the investigators. In his email to Jack, Kern had described himself as a single and available for immediate relocation, but hadn't said much about his sons. In truth, Kern was ambivalent about the caretaker's job he had been offered. He described it on his Facebook page as a good offer, but with his drawbacks, because he would be more than 2 hours away from his sons and he wouldn't have cell phone service. Kern and his ex-wife, Tina, had divorced in 1997, and Zach and Nick were already 19 and 17, but Kern made a point of seeing them nearly every day, even if that meant waiting around the corner from their house until after Tina left for work. Kern's marriage wasn't the only thing in his life that had fallen apart. In the 1990s, he worked as a sound engineer at the local club, but when the job was lost in 2000, he had trouble finding a new one. He lived with his parents for a few years, but then his father kicked him out after no one was sure where he slept, maybe in his car. But dispute all that, maybe because of it, he never really had unsteady in his communication and commitment to Zach and Nick. He focused on his children in the intense way certain divorced dads do when they're cut off from the daily routines of their family. He had another son from an early marriage whom he didn't see. That might have played a part too. He only cared about these two. I mean, that was his purpose. That was his thing. His ex-wife told me it sometimes drove her crazy that he spent his last penny on cell phone bills to make sure he could stay in touch with the boys, instead of saying keeping up with his child support payments all day, texting every day, Tina said. Zach and Nick presented themselves to the world as pretty tough. They had both covered in tattoos. Zach plays in a heavy metal band, but they had a remarkably tender relationship with their father. They knew, for instance, to always answer his texts quickly so that he didn't get his feelings hurt or follow up with a, "Oh, I see you're busy," or "Too cool for dad." The day Kern left for Ohio, Nick, who was a senior in high school, lent him $20 that night. Nick texted him before going to the party. "I love you. I miss you. I'm proud of you. Good luck." When Kern got up the next morning, he wrote Nick, "Text me when you wake up. Love you. Leaving soon." Lafayette knew that they weren't taking Kern to the same spot that they shot Gregor, Polly, and Davis. Not even Beasley was that crazy. Instead, their destination was a narrow wooded area behind them all on the western edge of Akron, where Beasley had Rafferty dig a grave that night before. He'd done a sloppy job. It was barely 2 feet deep and uneven, but Beasley no longer seemed to care. It was a Sunday, and the mall was empty. Locals referred to the place as a dead mall because every store had gone out of business during the recession, except for a mattress and furniture liquidator, who desperate families went to sell their belongings. The other storefronts were suspended in the last month of forced cheer, with neon signs on the window that started reading, "Everything must go, wall to wall savings." They parked and Beasley told Kern that they had been there squirrel hunting earlier and he lost his watch. Kern followed Beasley into the woods behind, where littering with plastic cups and beer cans from a party. Rafferty kept his distance. He told the investigators and then heard a pop. He saw Kern on his knees holding the side of his head. He kept taking enormous gulps of air. 3 shots later, he was still gulping. Finally, on the 5th shot, he stopped. That night, Nick tried to call his dad, got no answer, but he figured he was just getting settled. Then a couple of days went by and Nick started to get worried. I called him like 2,000 times because he would contact us like every hour of the day, and now nothing? Nick began sleeping with his phone in his hand and waking up to listening to messages, even though no new ones had registered. The next Sunday, a week later, he was at a friend's house watching a football game. Then his mom called and told him to come home immediately. She had something she needed to tell him. "Tell me now," he screamed on the phone. "Tell me right fucking now." As he explained to me, I knew because that would be the only explanation for him not calling us. I was initially drawn to the story of the Beasley murders because I thought it would be illuminate the isolation and variety of so many working class men who had been pushed by the falsely common one way in life. A 9 to 5 job, a wife, and children, and in another, far more precious one. Unemployed or underemployed, single or divorced, crashing or later spare beds, or on the backseat of their cars. And what other moment in history would it have been plausible for a serial killer to identify middle-aged white men as the most vulnerable targets? But what I discovered in the course of my reporting was something quite different. As traditional family structures are falling apart for working class men, many of them are formed new kinds of relationships. Two old high school friends who chat so many times a day they need to buy themselves walkie-talkies. A father who texts his almost grown sons as he goes to bed at night and he wakes up in the morning. Christians often talk about a God-shaped hole, a need inside us that can be filled only by faith, but perhaps we share a family-shaped hole, where the old structures rekindle for men. They find ways to replace them with alternate attachments, bonds with one or two people that offer the warmth and intimacy typically provided with a wife or significant other. If anything else, these improvised families can prove more intense, but they are formed under distress and lacking a conventional domestic routine or recognized status. They must be consistently tended and reinforced. And this is a part of the segment where it's just statements, options, thoughts, processes, whatnots, extras. Okay, are we ready? Ready. Richard Beasley had believed that no one would come looking for the divorced, unsettled middle-aged men he was targeting, but he should have known better. Like his victim, Beasley had himself divorced and lived apart from his children and was sporadically employed. Like them, he too had created an intense surrogate family relationship with a broken Rafferty. When prosecutors interviewed Beasley's daughter, Tanya, she said that when she saw their dad and Rafferty together on Sunday mornings, they seemed like father and son, much closer to one another than she and her dad even have been. On the stand, Rafferty described Beasley as the one person that I can go to about anything, a father that I never had. Rafferty, of course, did have a father, one whom he lived with and provided for him right down the to the white Buick LeSabre. But long before the murders, Raphael would complain to his half-sister Rennie about his tough dad. Michael was on him. Michael hardly had an easy situation himself. When Brogan was not yet a week old, Michael came home from work one day to discover his wife Yvette and his infant son were gone. It was brutally cold that week. Brogan was born on Christmas Eve, and Michael searched for 48 hours before Yvette came back home. He assumed she was doing drugs again. As much as Michael loved her, he decided to kick her out and raise Brogan alone, with the help of his own mother, Rita. At the trial, the local press seized on the story of how, at age 5, when he was in kindergarten, Brogan would eat breakfast alone, get himself dressed, and make his own way to the bus stop. He raised himself in one option. One grade school counselor who knew him told the jury, but things weren't so quite simple. Michael explained to me that he worked an early shift at the machine shop and had to leave the house by 6:30 a.m. Before he left, he laid out clothes for his son, poured his favorite cereal in a bowl, left him a little pitcher of milk, then he gently woke him up and left for work. Then said Michael allows that I put on a lot of responsibility on Brogan because it was just the two of us. Michael is regimented and strict and had a fierce temper. He had been raised to believe that the boys don't cry, and he raised Brogan the same way. Rainier believes that Brogan drifted towards Beasley because he was a little scared of his father, and Beasley was like an escape. Okay. In November 12th, 2012, a jury convicted Brogan Rafferty of 2,000 criminal counts, including murder, robbery, and kidnapping. Judge Lynn Calhoun told Lafayette that he had been dealt a lousy hand in life, but he had embraced the evil and sentenced him to life without parole. April 2013, Richard Beasley was also convicted of murder and was sentenced to death. Throughout his trial, he maintained that he was innocent. Both Beasley and Lafayette were appealing their convictions. In letters to his father now, Lafayette sometimes sounded like a kid and sometimes like a damaged man. I'm sorry. I left my room a mess when I left. I'm sorry for disgracing you and your family name. Which he wrote from his jail. He reads books from the library straight out of the high school curriculum. Grapes of Wrath, Catching in the Rhine, Treasure Island, and a device with All Quiet of the Western Front. He wrote, because his present life is like war. Each man fights his own battle, and each with an invisible enemy. He was admitted to his dad that he used to resent him for being so strict, but now he's grateful, because thanks to all the rules and all the chores and premature independence, he knows how to take care of himself. Mostly, though, his letters are full of longing for family, for his dad and his half-sisters, his dog, Whiskey, and his cats, Cow and Monkey, and his mom and his grandma and grandpa and his aunts and uncles. The Rafayettes are an old Irish clan with a coat of arms hanging in the living room. Rafferty draws the coats of arms sometimes in prison, along with 2 tattoos he wants to get. One that says Dad and another one that says Rita. I deserve to be here, but I don't deserve to sit in a hole while my loved ones and pets die around me. That's hell. I love you, Dad, and I always will.
Can you tell me what you love about crime? Can you tell me what you wanna know? I can give you what you need. Do you wanna know about the murder? Who died first?
Purchase your tracks today.
I wonder if they're still alive. Do you wanna know what they did first? Now can you tell me? Now can you tell me? How do you feel about this? Is it just what we feel?